Found footage is a subgenre of horror that I have a lot of fondness for. It's a fairly accessible way to make a horror movie since the footage doesn't need to, look nice. Probably the most infamous found footage horror movie is The Blair Witch Project, which is a movie in which not a lot happens. Some people kind of yell at each other in the woods for a while. There isn't even that big of a finale. No action set pieces, just some light mythology and a whole lot of mildly unsettling sequences, but the movie still works really well, at least it does for me. And that is because when done well, found footage movies are greater than the sum of their parts. The Blair Witch Project made an insane amount of money on a tiny budget, and that ushered in a new age of movies trying to cash in on that craze. You could make one movie with just a crappy camera and not have that much happen, and people would still go to the theaters to watch it. And this winning formula proved itself again with the Paranormal Activity movies that also made insane amounts of money on very small budgets, and the craze just kept going. But with the promise of a massive box office return for such little investment, the genre became overrun with poorly executed, poorly planned movies that fell flat on the big screen. So while I can sit here and say that I love found footage, what I really mean is that I love a handful of found footage movies in a sea of forgettable, soulless cash grabs. But the core idea of found footage is great, so when I had a commenter suggest that I read the book Found, I ordered it immediately and read it in a couple days. Found is an anthology of horror short stories, all from different authors, and the book was edited and compiled by Gabino Iglesias and Andrew Cull. There are 18 stories in the book, all sharing the common link that they revolve around either found footage or lost media, whether it be an internet discussion board or physical VHS tapes. And the concept is certainly intriguing because found footage as a genre is defined by the way that it looks. It's defined by the fact that the visual element looks realistic. So to take that concept and translate it into written form was something that I wasn't sure would work, but it turns out it can work pretty well if you do it right. So today I'm going to be going through the first 6 stories in this book. I'll be breaking down what happens in each of them and giving my thoughts on them as I go. I originally wanted to cover them all in one long video, but I'm actually heading out of town next week for my sister's wedding, and I wanted to get ahead on these videos. So this will be a 3-part series that will release over the next couple weeks. And typically I'd say that I'll make a second part if this video does particularly well, but I don't really care about that. I found a lot of these stories to be super cool and super interesting, and I feel like nobody's talking about them, so I'm going to be talking about them whether anyone watches or not. So if you clicked on this video because you thought I'd be talking about a found footage movie and I kind of tricked you, don't click off. I think you'll really like this, because not everybody has the capacity to go out and film and write a found footage movie and either get it released or even put it out on YouTube. So this book serves as an opportunity for these really creative minds to show what they could do in found footage but in written form instead. I found myself picturing what all of these would look like if they were an actual movie, and it all seems very interesting to me, so I hope you'll stick around. Again, this is going to be a ton of fun. Content warning for all sorts of violence and some brief mentions of pregnancy complications and terminations. There isn't any sexual violence in this book, which I personally appreciated. But if any of the subjects that I just mentioned make you uncomfortable, then I would suggest that you watch a different one of my videos. I didn't find this book to be that extreme, but everyone has different levels of sensitivity. Also, sorry for switching up my recording space here. I just got a new desk for my office and it looks way nicer in here, but it makes my recording a little bit different. I'm going to get a camera pretty soon, so I'll be recording my normal spot. I'm just doing this for the time being. But enough intro already. Let's get into the literary found footage horror of Found. The book starts with a warning. It says, you should put this book back, return it, forget about it, don't read it, don't say I didn't warn you. I've read a couple books with these ominous warnings on them, and I think they can be really fun if the content inside actually feels kind of cursed. And I wouldn't say that Found has a super cursed feeling, nothing like when I first read House of Leaves, but I do think it justifies this creepy warning. After the warning, we are given an introduction to the book, and then we find the first story, 11/7/19 by Andrew Cull. We start by being told that on this date, a YouTube channel was removed by YouTube. It was an ASMR sleep channel that was one of the best known channels on the platform. This was following an FBI raid on the home of a man named Thomas Boyd Sinclair, who lived with his parents on a ranch in Texas, and he was the owner of the channel. By the time the FBI raided the ranch, it had been left to rot for 6 months, the cattle were completely on their own, and the abandonment coincided with the death of Boyd's father. They raided the ranch after receiving a call from a trucker who found an emaciated cow on the side of the road, and it had what the driver described as demonic symbols carved onto it. It would later be found that Thomas Boyd killed every single member of his family, and he claimed later that he was visited in his dreams by faceless beings that would instruct him to carve the symbols onto the cattle. These beings would tell him that carving these symbols was the only way to protect the world from Armageddon, and that he was instructing the president through the carvings. Then the faceless beings would take a sharp object and carve the flesh where their face should be into the symbols that Boyd was to carve into the cattle. Eventually, Boyd's father discovered the carvings on the cattle and confronted his son. Boyd says that the beings showed him a symbol and told told him to carve it onto his own father. He killed his father and carved the symbol 23 times on his body. He then killed the rest of his family and was eventually apprehended by the FBI. Even though these events are certainly alarming, they were actually not the true reason that the ASMR channel belonged to Boyd was taken down. It was because of complaints from the listeners. Listeners would report headaches after falling asleep to the videos. Some even recorded violent thoughts and dreams, and the channel was taken down in the interest of public safety. Investigation into the delusions of Boyd would reveal a strange link to a Japanese myth of a faceless woman that would sometimes appear to strangers. Presumably doctored photos of the faceless woman have appeared online, but the woman bears a striking resemblance to what Boyd saw in his dreams. Upon further investigation of the recording equipment that Boyd used for his ASMR channel, the FBI found that he had mixed in the sounds of him carving the symbols into the cattle. He mixed it just low enough for the conscious mind to not register it, but still enough for it to leak into the subconscious mind of the listener. But something darker hid in 2 of his videos. While never confirmed, it is theorized that 2 of the videos on Boyd's Sleep ASMR channel contain the sounds of him murdering his family, but those videos are now lost media. And that is it for the first story in this collection. I really like this one because while I couldn't really do this aspect of it justice, it is played completely straight. This story actually comes before the table of contents in this book and starts with assuming that the reader knows about the story since it was on the internet and news everywhere a couple of years ago. And when I first read this, I almost believed that it was a real thing before realizing that if a man really did murder his family, carve mysterious symbols into them, and have a spooky YouTube channel, there is no way that I wouldn't know about that by now. But the story really is convincing in this idea that all of this actually happened in a way that none of the other stories in this collection tap into. I really enjoyed this story a whole lot. The next story is pretty quick, and actually most of these stories are pretty quick, so if you're looking for something to read that's maybe like less intense, or if your attention span isn't that great, you don't have great reading stamina, I think this is a really good book to start with. The story is called 2 Months Too Long, and it's about a girl named Shonda who is obsessed with her ex-boyfriend named Alex to the point of stalking him. The first part of the story plays out entirely through text conversations. Shonda says that she needs to meet with Alex to explain herself, and that she knows that he still loves her. He calls her crazy and says that they should never have even dated, and that while they were only together for 2 months, it was 2 months too long. She messages his friend to try to get in contact with him after he blocks her, and she messages his mother as well, but both of them turn her down. We then get an email from the factory that Alex works at that reveals that she tried to sneak into his work at the factory but was removed by security. Alex files a restraining order against her, and she leaves a written note on his door claiming that she is pregnant, and Alex emails her and demands a paternity test when the baby is born. Shonda says that she actually has an ultrasound picture, and we get a police report from an abortion clinic that she has broken into. Several things are missing, including some abortion byproducts. Shonda tells Alex that she's going in for an ultrasound and asks him to meet her there. Alex is very skeptical of this whole situation. He says she's crazy, that they always use protection, and that's very convenient that she got pregnant right when he broke up with her. She's upset at this, and we then get the transcript of a 911 call made from an ultrasound technician. She says that she had someone come in for an ultrasound who seemed to be having something shoved pretty far up her birth canal, and it smelled awful, and then she left shortly afterwards. It's pretty gross. Shonda then sends a picture of an ultrasound to Alex, who doesn't believe that it's real. He says it's fake and made up and that it could be anybody's baby. Shonda is extremely upset that this proof isn't enough for him, and she says that she'll see him in court. We then get the transcript of a 911 call from Alex, who has found his mother brutally beaten to death. Shonda sends him an email saying that she left proof in a bag on the counter of his mom's kitchen. The last thing that we get in the story is the obituary for Shonda. She was found dead in an alley, and she died of an unknown infection, and that's where the story ends. So what happened here? Shonda was an obsessive, crazy ex-girlfriend that wanted to get back with Alex, and he kept rejecting her even after she reached out to his friends and family. Eventually, she decided to use a fake pregnancy as a way to get Alex back, but he doesn't believe her, and in order to make it more believable, she breaks into an abortion clinic. She steals some kind of biological waste from the clinic and inserts it inside herself, and eventually she kills Alex's mom in a fit of rage and leaves the discarded biological waste as proof. Then she passes away from the infection that she presumably contracted by stuffing that dead tissue inside of herself. It's all pretty wild stuff. This story didn't really stand out to me that much. I think it's well written, but I think the idea seems pretty standard. It's a stalker story, which has been done many times already. I also don't know if any of these shocking moments had quite the shock value that the author was going for. Alex's mom dying was honestly kind of expected, at least to me. And I should say that I read a lot of horror novels. That's pretty much like all I read. So whenever a character is introduced in a story that has like a connection to our main character, my immediate thought is like, oh yeah, they're gonna die. The formatting in the story is interesting with all these memos and text text and notes written on doors, but I wonder if a less straightforward story would work better for this format. It just feels a little standard the way that it's written now. But overall, I do think the interesting formatting really helps this story, and I think it's a fun little piece of fiction that would feel right at home on like the No Sleep subreddit, but is awesome in this book as well. Our next story is Face Down Volume Death 8 by Josh Roundtree. This one is about a high school kid who was really into this series on VHS called Face Down Death. These videos contain supposedly real killings and deaths, although our narrator can tell that a lot of it is fake. This seems to be inspired by the real-life Faces of Death series, which is a video series that includes a lot of people just dying. But the fictional series is hosted by Dr. Guillotine, who introduces all of the clips, and each entry in the series always ends in a very similar way: a murder committed by the masked priest. The priest always wears black robes and a rusted iron mask with eye and mouth slits, and a victim is tied down and the priest kills him in a different way every time. Sometimes it's a machete, sometimes a baseball bat, but the victim is always killed by the priest and then devoured by a group of faceless children. It's never made super clear how the kids managed to eat the bloody remains of each victim despite not having mouths, but they managed to find a way somehow. The videotapes always end with the phrase, "Some gods demand blood," and they were first shown to our narrator by his friend Arthur during a slumber party at his house. And Arthur went mysteriously missing a couple months ago. That can't be good. A few months later, the narrator watched the newest volume of Face Down Death and swears that the victim that was killed by the priest at the end was Arthur. His face is covered, but he is wearing Arthur's signature jacket and Nikes that the narrator recognizes. Our narrator starts to wonder if there is a connection between these killings and his father's death. He never saw his dad's body, who died a couple years ago, and was just told that he got in a car accident, and he is convinced that his dad was killed by the priest somehow. He sneaks this new VHS of Face Down Death Volume 8 into his home. It's just him and his mom at his house, and she doesn't like him watching that kind of stuff. He gets to the end of the tape and hears his mom enter the room. He's expecting her to be really pissed and turn the videotape off, but she just silently sits on the ground next to him, both of them in front of the TV. The priest enters the shot, and the narrator is a little disappointed to see that the victim isn't his dad. As he watches the killing, his mom starts to softly sing something in his ear, and he can't make out what it is. He looks over and she's crying, and then something rattles the doorknob of their house. The door opens and the faceless children pour into the living room. The narrator is frozen in place, and one of them approaches his mother with black robes and the mask of the priest, and she puts the robes on. She is still crying as one of the faceless children hands her a machete, and another child pulls out an old camera and starts to record the scene. He wears a green jersey and Nikes. She looks at the narrator, her own son, and is still crying. And he thinks that nothing has been the same between them since his dad dies. She has been nothing but despair, and she puts the mask on. As soon as she does, her whole demeanor changes. She's been transformed into the priest. The faceless kids start to sound restless and hungry, and she raises the machete, and our narrator says that he doesn't want to watch what happens next. And that's the end of the story. I really enjoy this story because I think it has a good level of mystique, while also giving us some good, solid hints as to what is going on with the priest and the faceless children. I personally think that the narrator's mom isn't the one that's doing all of the killings. It just seems that putting on the priest's clothes almost turns you into that murderous being. The faceless children seem to feast not only on the physical pain of the victims, but the emotional turmoil as well, which would make sense as to why they would be drawn to the narrator's family. His dad's death left a dark cloud over he and his mom, and that just makes them the perfect candidate for this horrible ritual. They have all the despair that these children need. I thought for a moment that the victims were turning into the faceless kids because one of the kids is wearing Arthur's clothes, but I think it's more likely that they just took the clothes after they ate him. Overall, I think this is a cool story that definitely has a few layers to it, so if you caught anything that I missed, then please let me know. My analysis of each of these stories has been done pretty quick, but a lot of these short stories could have like a full deep dive done on them, which I think is the mark of a great short story in my opinion. Our next story is Junk Pickup by Fred Fischer IV. The story centers around a young teenager named Peter who is going dumpster diving with his dad. They go around to dumps and abandoned houses and try to find valuable things. At the start of the story, Peter mentions that his shoes no longer fit him, and his dad reminds him to be on the lookout for another bigger pair of shoes when they go dumpster diving. It's clear that neither of Peter's divorced parents are in a particularly good financial situation, but this doesn't seem to bother Peter at all. He likes looking for junk with his dad on the weekends. And this weekend is special because instead of going to the dump, they're going to an abandoned house that is ready to be looted and picked through. While searching through piles of discarded furniture and clothes, Peter finds a footlocker with a bunch of VHS tapes inside and wants to take it back to his dad's place. He is particularly fond of finding old tapes and has built up a collection of over 300 random movies and TV shows and whatever else he can find. Peter takes his shoes off while searching through the piles since they hurt his feet, and he leaves in his dad's truck at the end of the day without picking his shoes back up, and he just thinks that he'll go back for them later. He and his dad hang out for the rest of the night, and his dad swears that he'll find him a new, bigger bed frame soon. Peter is currently sleeping on an old race car bed that's too small for him, but he doesn't really seem to mind this. He decides that he wants to see what all of the new VHS tapes that he found today contain. Most of them just have old movies taped onto them or TV shows and nothing like too exciting, but he pops in a tape that is simply labeled videos. This tape just contains some footage of a drummer at a concert and a few commercials, but then it cuts to grainy home video footage of a young boy looking at the camera. He sets the camera up at the foot of his bed, which has an elaborate ornate headboard. The kid looks at the camera and lays down to sleep, and nothing happens for a while until a nightlight must have clicked on somewhere, because the details of the room could still just barely be made out in the darkness. The hairs on Peter's head stood on end as he watched a pale hand attached to an unnaturally long arm snake up from beneath one side of the bed and begin to tug at one side of the comforter. Peter could no longer see the kid by the faint light, but he could make out a faint whimpering sound as he turned up the volume and leaned forward. Heavy breathing, accompanied by a slight wheeze, began to drown out the boy's crying as something else emerged from the greater darkness at the far side of the bed. A substantial shadow resembling a man's head and shoulders began to form. Small glowing eyes looked towards the camera. They reminded Peter of an animal caught in a car's high beams. There was a great rustling of covers, followed by a brief shout, and then the tape kicked to static. So Peter is obviously freaked out by this, and he calls his dad over, and the two of them watch the tape again, and his dad says that he hasn't seen anything like it, and they go off to bed. The next day, Peter takes one of the many rusty bikes from his dad's garage and heads back to the house where he left his shoes, and finds them sitting on the curb where he left them. There is now a dumpster in front of the house, and a man standing in front of it as well, going through the trash. Peter approaches him and asks if this was his house. The man says that he grew up here, but he hasn't been back in a long time. Peter says he found some old tapes, and the man starts to brush him off, but Peter notices something. He points out to the ornate bed frame that he can see in the pile of furniture and says that it's the same one that he saw in the videotape, and the man replies, "Then you must have seen Mr. Brass." The man says that his name is Glenn and that he had an older brother named John who had some sort of disease that made his legs not work very well, something like muscular dystrophy. John was bedridden for most of his life, and he used to say that there was a man under his bed, and this man would climb out during the night and caress him with his long fingers. His parents couldn't find any evidence of this and figured that John was making it up to cope with his health issues, and one night the family dog was found missing a foot with a bloody stump in its place. And John was wailing and crying and saying that the man under his bed did it. They managed to save the dog, and John started sleeping with just a mattress on the ground, but it didn't help, and the man still came back every night. And John ended up dying while he was still young, and Glenn says that it's all just bad memories and that Peter should just throw out the tape. Peter thinks about this and then heads home that day after a long day of talking and dumpster diving. He thinks about telling his dad about what he learned, but he decides not to, and his dad tells him that he has a surprise for him, but that it'll have to wait until later that night. Peter falls asleep on the couch watching Ghostbusters, and his dad lovingly carries him to his new bed. A bed that he picked up from the house. It was a great find. It has an ornate headboard and everything. I think you guys can see where this is going. Peter awoke in the cold dark to the rank smell of decaying leaves in a stopped-up gutter. Where was he? There was a rustling at the foot of the bed. Peter pulled the comforter up and peered into the darkness. Nothing. A loud wheeze erupted nearby, filling the room with the corrupt stink of crushed tonsil stones. Barely able to stifle a heave, Peter tried to call out for his dad, but his voice was crippled to a whimper. In what felt like a reaction to his simpering attempt at speech, he was roughly yanked to the end of the bed where his left leg was held firmly in the vice-like grip of a pale hand. Two shining orbs drew out of the darkness towards him as the visitor hungrily set about his work. End of story. This is one of the standouts in this collection. It's kind of creeping me out now as I'm recording this late at night. I think it's really eerie. I like the freaky description of Mr. Brass's unnaturally long hand and like these wheezing breaths. We get everything that we need from Glenn to understand that this seems to be a creature that haunts the bed, even though it keeps coming back if you get rid of the bed. It's a very simple boogeyman story, but I think the dumpster diving angle of it makes it a little more fun, and the original found footage tape is described really, really well. This is another one that just feels like a creepypasta, but in the best way possible. It feels like it takes that formula and elevates it to a point that I think justifies its place in this anthology. Our next story is Disappearances at Coal Hill by Nick Kolakowski. This one centers around some mysterious disappearances that have been happening in Coal Hill, West Virginia. You probably could have captured that from the title. We start with an email between a freelance journalist and the editor for a website. The journalist pitches a story about the disappearance in the Coal Hill area. We learn that this town is really out of the way. It's not a tourist town at all. It's just this small little mountain town. And a couple weeks ago, an experienced backpacking couple went missing there. The police started a search for them, and one of the officers went missing after walking out into the woods during the search. None of the 3 missing people have been seen since, and the journalist goes to check it out. We then get a news article covering the disappearances, and we learn that the freelance journalist has also gone missing after going to camp in Coal Hill. The article is posted to a subreddit, and we have some discussion regarding what may have happened to them. One user is from Coal Hill and says that the area is deceptively dangerous. The editor of the original website from the start of the story messages this user and asks if they would be willing to show her around the area. She offers to pay them for their time while they investigate, and they agree. The editor, who is named Catherine, meets up with the local, who is named Misha. Misha tells Catherine about a local legend named the Bone Man, who is supposedly this cannibalistic serial killer that lives out in a shack in the woods. Misha says that she is willing to show Catherine around the town, but that she will not go into the woods with her. They go to a diner to interview some of the locals. They talk to a man who says that he's not sure what happened to the people that went missing, but that he suspects that their disappearances are more mundane than you'd think. This is actually a belief that I personally hold. People like to draw supposed connections between people disappearing mysteriously in places like caves and national parks. The reality is most likely that those people just met a very mundane end to their lives. They were either attacked by an animal or fell down a ravine or got stuck in a cave, because when you enter nature, you re-enter the food chain, as they say. But back to the story, Catherine asks the man in the diner about the Bone Man. He just laughs and says that the man in the woods is a guy named Charlie who is totally harmless. He's a bit of a hermit, but he has never been anything other than friendly, if not a little eccentric. And as they talk, an unnamed man approaches them, and it says that no one could identify him or give any details as to his appearance. He tells them to stop the interview and that they shouldn't be poking around these disappearances. He says that if they don't stop snooping around, they'll disappear too. Catherine and Misha are obviously freaked out by this, and they go to find the site of the journalist's car, which was parked next to a trailhead. Catherine says that she wants to go into the woods to investigate, and Misha refuses. Catherine offers to pay her $1,000, and Misha relents and finally goes along with it, and that's where their footage ends. We then get another post from the subreddit that we mentioned earlier, which claims that Catherine and Misha have gone missing. This is followed by a news article that confirms their deaths. They were found stabbed to death, and a man named Charles Varney, the hermit from earlier, is the one being charged with the crime, and there is some evidence to link him to the killings. We get another Reddit post from a user claiming that the official story is a lie, and that Varney couldn't have done it, and that the town is hiding something. He says he's going to Coal Hill to investigate, and that anyone is welcome to join him. The last thing we get in the story is a short, one-sentence transcript from a cell phone video. It's assumed that this video was taken by the Reddit user that went to investigate the disappearance. The transcript simply reads, "They're coming up from underground from..." And that's where the story ends. So this one has left me a little confused since I read it. The disappearances seem to be linked with these things coming up from the ground, but we don't really know what they are. It also seems like there's some sort of mystery man that wants to keep the whole situation under wraps. He confronts the 2 girls at the diner and says that he'll make them disappear. And then we have the Bone Man, but he seems to be a red herring. It's also a little strange that Misha and Catherine's bodies are found having been stabbed to death while the other victims were never found. My thought is that they maybe weren't killed by whatever was coming up from the ground and were instead killed by the mystery man for continuing to poke around. I'm pretty mixed on this story. I could be missing something, but the ending with the final line of "they're coming up from the ground" felt a little shoehorned in. It wasn't really set up properly, in my opinion. It kind of feels like they had this cool idea for a story involving all of these disappearances, but then they needed some sort of spooky, shocking ending, and they tried their best with that. There are a couple stories in here that feel like they're wanting to set up a novel or trying to get the reader to seek out more of their work so they can know the full story. And I think that can be really cool when it's done in the right context, but I also don't think that an anthology book is the right place to do that. It just makes it feel a little unsatisfying. I've talked a lot about ambiguity in horror and how I really love it when it's done right, but unfortunately I don't think the ambiguity in here works for me, but also that's just my opinion. I think there was a lot to love in this story, and the formatting is super interesting. I love how we follow a consistent thread from the opening with the freelance journalist until the final video. And the story sets up a lot of really interesting plot threads and details, and I think it could be really great if it was fleshed out and expanded into something a little bit longer. But as a short story, it just didn't come together for me personally. No hate on the author at all. Writing for this anthology in particular seems like it would be very tricky given the subject matter. And again, anybody who is willing to put their work out in a book and publish it or put it out on the internet deserves a ton of respect. I think it's very impressive and something that I personally haven't really done before. I haven't really written anything, so I can't really complain that much. Next up, we have The Veiled Lady by Angela Sylvaine, and this one is a pretty different take on found footage, with the focus being on journal entries that have been found, presumably after the story ends. The story starts with our narrator, a woman writing in her journal, and we learn that she has been in a coma for the past 14 months and is trying to regain her cognitive functions. She's been told that writing in a journal is a good way to relearn the writing process and will also help her rebuild her ability to think in coherent sentences. She recounts waking up from the coma and her husband greeting her and crying from joy. She remembers dreaming that she needed to get back to him and that he saved her. The next entry has her returning home and settling back into a comfortable routine of reading. But her husband says that she shouldn't be reading the old murder mysteries that she used to love to read. He says that he's worried that those books will bring her unpleasant emotions and in general just seems a little controlling over her, but she doesn't read the books in order to respect his wishes and in general is very grateful for him. The next entry tells us that all of her old journals are gone. Her husband has gotten rid of them because the memories of her old self are too painful for him and her to endure. The narrator is pretty bothered by this. She laments that she won't be able to reclaim those memories since so much of her life before the coma feels foggy and unclear. In the next entry, the narrator reveals the rage that she feels that is triggered by the strangest things. She feels angry when she looks at the stairs, when she looks at a ceiling fan, when she hears her husband's voice, but the object that triggers the most rage for her is a small statue of a veiled lady. Her husband says that this statue must evoke such strong feelings in her because she feels like she has a metaphorical veil over her mind. We learn that her husband has been gentle with her, but also seems to be withholding affection. He doesn't want the two of them to sleep in the same bed together. She worries that he might have done something while she was in her coma and that he possibly could have cheated on her. She wonders if he even wanted her to wake up at all. The next entry talks about her rose bushes that she had dedicated herself to growing in the backyard. They're gone now, and her husband says that they died, so he ripped them out of the ground. They've been replaced by little evergreen bushes that the narrator really dislikes, and she thinks that she wants her husband to impale himself on the sharp thorns of her rose bushes, but doesn't know why she would ever think of something so violent like that. The next entry has her remembering that they had a dog named Marshmallow before she went into the coma. She found the dog as a stray and took her in, and her husband was never a fan of her from the start. She asks her husband where the dog went, and he says that she passed away while she was sleeping. She presses him on this, and he gets upset and says that her rose bushes didn't actually die. He says that he pulled them out of the ground, that he buried the dog where they used to be, and then he used the dog's buried body as fertilizer for his evergreen bushes. This eruption of emotion seems to come out of nowhere, and we learn that he has video cameras throughout the house and is spying on her throughout the day. She says that she has to write her journal entries in the bathroom to keep them hidden from him. She also explains again that she is having violent thoughts about her husband, but wants to ignore them because she still sees him as the one that saved her. She finds an old photo album and sees pictures of herself as a smiling child and starts to feel that rage bubble up again. Her husband takes the photo album from her and tells her that they should look to the future and not the past. At this point, she is almost certain that he did something bad when she was asleep and is just waiting to uncover the truth of what actually happened. The next entry recounts her watching a soap opera and seeing a woman with a flowered dress, and she immediately remembers seeing her husband with a woman wearing that same flowered dress. She remembers him slipping the dress off of her without noticing his wife standing in the hall, and she wonders if this is what he's trying to prevent her from remembering. She moves back into the bedroom with him, and he says that they can wait until she's ready to be intimate again, and she wonders if he's thinking of the lady with the flowered dress, and she starts to hate him. Her husband leaves her alone at the house the next day, and she rushes over to the evergreen bushes and starts to dig out underneath them and see what's buried there. Her husband leaves her alone at the house next day, and she rushes over to the evergreen bushes and starts to dig underneath them and see what she can find. She finds her old diaries, the collar of her dead dog, and sees some fabric from a dress with flowers on it. It's the same one that the girl in her memory was wearing, and this is what he didn't want her to find. She keeps one of the old buried diaries for herself and replaces everything as it was. She washes herself and stashes the diary in the bathroom, and she reads it the next day. Dear diary, he's asleep. I read the diary. After I saw them, I waited for them. The veiled lady clutched tight in my hand. The woman in the flowered dress screamed when I brought the statue down on her head again and again and again, like my mother screamed. And Marshmallow wouldn't stop barking. I had to stop her barking. He hid it all for me. He saved me. I love him so much. A flood of memories comes to her, and she remembers that they both ripped up the rose bushes and hid the evidence. That's why buried under the rose bushes are the journals, the dog, and the dead woman with the flowered dress. She also remembers that after this, he pushed her down the stairs and left her staring at the ceiling fan in a crumpled heap on the floor. And this is what led to her being in her coma. The story ends with her thinking that he probably doesn't know that she remembers what happened and what he did to her. She thinks to herself that he is actually quite lucky, that he's very lucky to still still be alive. This story is pretty interesting to me, and I would consider it one of the standouts in this collection. The diary formatting is simple but very interesting, and I like the twist in it. I was expecting her husband to have done something really terrible, or for him to not actually be her husband at all and just be convincing her of their history together. And of course he did do something terrible by cheating on her, but the big reveal being that she murdered his mistress with the veiled lady statue and that they buried her together was unexpected. They also hinted her being more mentally unstable than we originally thought. She kills the dog for no reason and alludes to her potentially killing her own mother beforehand. And the ending gives us a real "I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me" vibe, with her saying that her husband is lucky to still be alive. And maybe it's just me, but I felt that this story had a lot of shades of The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is one of my favorite short stories of all time. They both deal with a woman slowly losing her grip on reality while building resentment towards their husband that has trapped them in their current situation. And this story obviously has a much more violent and shocking reveal than anything in The Yellow Wallpaper, but I think that format and trope works really well for a great short story. So I'd say that The Veiled Lady is one of my favorites in this collection. It's one that I've been thinking about more as I've read it, more so than some of the other ones I've covered in this video so far. There's another story after this one called The Spew of News by Clay McLeod Chapman that I don't really feel the need to cover in detail for a couple different reasons. The first being that so much of the horror in this comes from some very specific wording and descriptions of what happens to the victims in the story, and I would have a hard time relaying that in this video without just reading it all outright. And I try to stay away from reading long sections of a story outright. I want these videos to encourage people to seek out those original stories, and I don't want these to act as a total replacement for those. Whenever I talk about a story or a creepypasta or a novel, my wish is that you guys will go out and seek these out for yourself and read them, because I think it's a really gratifying and rewarding experience, even if you know what the story is like. But the other reason that I don't really want to cover this story is because it's definitely the most overtly political story in this collection. And while I actually agree with the sentiments that are being shared, it feels a little hokey to me. Politics and horror have always been connected, especially when it comes to social issues, but I felt that this story could have used a hearty helping of subtlety that was sorely lacking. Again, I think the ideas in this story are actually really cool, and I agree with what it's saying. It's a subject that has personally impacted people that I know, but I don't feel like doing a deep dive on it. That's not what this channel is really about. Plus, this gives you all an excuse to buy this anthology for yourselves and see what you're missing out on and what I maybe think about this particular issue. And you should buy this book and support the authors. They definitely deserve it. Again, I really like this collection. I think it's really fun and a very unique idea. But that's going to do it for part 1 of Found. If you clicked on this video because the title made it seem like I'd be talking about some illegal or forbidden movies, then thanks for listening to me talk about books for this long. And sorry if the title was a little bit misleading, but if you've made it this far, then hopefully that didn't really bother you that much. I gotta play the algorithm game. I'm not that big of a YouTuber yet. I personally love when books try to tackle a genre that is almost exclusively reserved for the screen. It's always interesting to see how well they can pull off that formula. I just finished reading My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones earlier today, which is a slasher novel, and I thought it translated that formula to the page incredibly well. I know there were technically slasher books before slasher movies existed, but this book was clearly an homage to the slasher movies of the golden age, and I thought it was great. If you haven't subscribed yet and you like this video, then please do that. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subs by the end of 2025, and I'm getting there faster than I thought, which is awesome. This board has truly been insane, and that Jeff the Killer video that I posted last week with the messed up, crackly audio is on track to be my most viewed video ever, which is kind of wild. If you'd like to support me further, then please consider becoming a channel member where you'll get early access to all my videos, access to exclusive videos, access to my Discord, and access to my members of my book club, just lots of access in general. A massive thank you to all my gold tier members: Amanda Mapes, Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Ezra, Silent Trails, Blue Eater Media, Tyler the Leper, Vix Corner, Missjoy16, Coco Boko, Cherry Shark, Status John, Moonsong Blog, Starlight Pink, Jack Zamore, Amanda Castillon, Lexi, Arcade Link Author, Pyrocat B, The Official Gar, Passion the Fruit, Ybab Flow, Hi, Zapodapos, Semra, Laura Gonzalez, Florapause, Rafael Sampao, and Classic Pats Games Plus. Your continued support of the channel lets me make videos as often as I do, and I'm super grateful for you guys and your genuine love of all sorts of spooky things. If you're a channel member that tuned in for my book club live stream, then thank you guys so much. That was a ton of fun. I was kind of nervous for my first live stream with you guys, but it ended up being a totally awesome and comfortable experience. We had a lot of fun discussion about books and also just other things that we love, and a spooky video that was sent to me by a commenter that's now lost media but scared me more than anything I've seen in my entire life. I have to do an unscripted rant of this particular thing because I thought it was so interesting and freaky. So last week, somebody commented on one of my videos with just a link to a YouTube video, and I don't know why, but I clicked on it, and it linked to a video from a channel that had probably 15 subscribers, and the video only had 10 views, and it was just a girl who was standing kind of far away from the camera in a room next to a mirror, and It was completely silent in the room, just like the static of like a crappy microphone. And the girl just stood there staring at the camera. And I can't remember if she actually looked freaky. She probably just looked normal. But then she started to slowly walk towards the camera while like maintaining eye contact. And I kid you not, it was the most scared I have been in like years. I exited out of the video like so unbelievably fast. I watched it for like maybe half a second. I exited the video. I hit the comment. I can't even see hitting comment, so I can't get back to it. And then I removed the video from my watch history because it scared me so bad. And like nothing happened. It was just a girl standing, staring at the camera and walking towards it. It could have been completely innocent, but it freaked me out. And the thumbnail was just a picture of that girl's face. So if anybody can find this video, then please let me know. If you're the person that commented that video and that's like your channel and you're like a fan of mine and your video was maybe you just walking towards the camera and being like, thank you so much, Davis. I love your videos. And I'm super sorry for muting your comment. It just scared me so much. Maybe it was totally innocent, but I kid you not, like my heart dropped. I freaked out. I was in complete fight or flight response mode. It's the scariest thing I've seen for a while. So if you meant to scare me, then props, because that was seriously like, I cannot remember the last time I've been terrified like that. But anyway, long unscripted rant over. Thanks again to everybody for watching this video and for listening to my weird, bizarre rant at the end. Be on the lookout for part 2 in the next couple weeks, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.